Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about communication between roles, specifically how to handle all the different roles of people on your development team and getting them to talk to each other. This is actually a question from Boku who asks, I wonder about the different communication channels between roles. Which roles are often together and such because they are closely related in development? You hinted at level designers and narratives being together, for example. Boku, this is a really good question. It's also a really serious question because it has to do with how you're going to manage a team, especially as teams get bigger. This gets more and more important. And get them to work together, even though there are several of them, many of different types of people. Some people want to have these discussions, some people will dominate the discussions, other people don't want to have discussions at all, but you need to get people to communicate. And at a high level, I would just answer and say this cross role communication is most often between programmers and designers who are assigned to the same task. Like you see it like combat needs to be put in your game, whether it's melee combat or ranged combat or both, or you're putting together dialogue. And a designer has designed those systems, and a programmer is going to code them, and you have to make sure those two people talk. This is not even to mention that the artists have to be involved for making the animations for combat or the UX for dialogue. This stuff, all these people have to be involved, but they frequently don't want to talk to each other. And also, people on different roles often have different styles of talking to each other. Just like I'll make high level generalizations later, but let's just say that in general, those roles seem to attract to different kinds of people who have different strengths and weaknesses, even when it comes to talking and communication. And you kind of have to accommodate it. One reason we used to do strike teams, we've been doing strike teams for decades. A strike team is when you take a small team assembled for a very specific purpose. They meet regularly to look at and discuss progress in one very specific feature area. So you may have a combat strike team, you may have a dialogue strike team, you may have a stealth strike team, you may have a strike team for a particular level in the game. A dungeon may get a strike team. This is basically the designer who did that area, plus whatever programmers are involved in getting it done, whatever artists are involved in getting it done. There will usually be a dedicated producer, often an assistant producer, assigned to that strike team. People from sound and QA may sit in as well, especially if it's nearing completion and they know what sounds they're going to need, or we want QA to know this level is about to go out or this feature is about to be added to the game. Please come to the strike team, listen to what we're doing, formulate a test plan, and know that when, we'll let you know when it goes live, be ready to test it. So these are small teams. And when I say small, they can be 4 people, they might be 8 people. Once they get past 10 or 12 people, it's getting too big. You basically want people who can sit around a conference table and comfortably talk with each other. This is something that, like I said, we've been doing for decades. It works really well. However, there were some aspects of my games that needed more tight integration, more tight loops on designing, coding, artifying, testing that, going back and making changes, and testing it again and going back and making changes. One thing where I noticed this right off the bat was in UX. My ultimate solution to this, and I'll get to how I got there, was to put an artist, a designer, and a programmer who are dedicated UX in the same office, in the same room. Often, it's just their room. So it's a 3-person room. It's those 3 people sitting in there, and that's what they're doing. What happened was we didn't do this on my games at Cybron and at Interplay. We didn't do this on Fallout. So a lot of the interfaces were put together by different people, and maybe you can tell. Art-wise, they fit together. Function-wise, maybe not so much. But I noticed at Troika, when we were working on Temple of Elemental Evil, that a programmer, a producer, and an artist were all seated near each other, right in a row, boom, boom, boom. And when we were putting together the combat HUD, they did an amazing job. To this day, I still think Temple of Elemental Evil has not only one of the best reproductions of D&D combat mechanics, especially 3.5 mechanics of any game that's ever shipped, but the HUD was a big part of that. It had that bar, and as you moved, it would drop. And if it dropped too low, you've eaten into your action space, and now you don't get to take an action. You just did 2 movements. It was a really good HUD. I watched that happen, and then later when I was at Carbine, I'm like, I'm going to do that on purpose. So I took a UI programmer, a UI artist, and a UI designer, and I put them together in one room and said, you are the UX team. They complained at first, especially the programmer. Programmers like quiet spaces. I want to talk in a bit about generalizations. They complained for about 2 weeks. Then they realized, A, they really liked it, and B, it was super productive. Because we would meet every week, and the first week, they're, we don't like it. The second week, we're like, we don't like it, but look what we did. By the third week, I was like, you guys are getting a lot of stuff done, and it's really good. And they're like, yeah, we are. And I'm like, it might be because you're all sitting next to each other, and the designer looks over the programmer's shoulder and goes, by the way, that isn't what the design document says. That's supposed to be over here. Or an artist may lean over and go, I know you had it here, but if you grouped them over here, it would work a lot better. And it did. They produced a really good UX. I repeated that process on Outer Worlds, and it worked great. I don't think the programmer ended up in the same office, but the designer and the artist sat together. It was a great team. They worked great. I was always in there just going, this is amazing. I love this. And they worked under my constraint of every user interface they made had to be done grayscale so I could see it. And only then could they add color. That worked great. They ended up liking that process because they knew once I approved something, they could do whatever they wanted to it color-wise as long as it was a hue and not a value. And I would still approve it because often I couldn't even see the changes they made. Worked great. Now, this kind of intercommunication doesn't always work because, warning, incoming generalizations. This is based on now I'm in my 44th year, 44 years of working with people in the industry, and certain roles tend to attract certain types. So here are my generalizations. Programmers want, I would say even need, and I'm a programmer, a very quiet space to work. They need to focus and concentrate. And if there's a lot of chatter, music, fax machines, they will go insane. Getting some programmers to talk to each other is like, pulling teeth. They don't want to talk to each other. What I found, though, is once they realize how good it is to talk to their fellow programmers, and occasionally do pair programming or pair debugging, they like it. But they still need that quiet space to work. That is the most often why you put programmers in the same offices together, usually with a door, not an open plan office, and give them quiet hours. Like, hey, from 10 to noon, don't go bug these programmers. Artists are almost the exact opposite. And remember, this is a generalization, but in general, I find that artists are in their office and they're drawing stuff and animating and doing other stuff, and they're chatting with each other the whole time. Sometimes they have music playing. Sometimes they have movies playing. I can't tell you the number of times I've gone in to watch a 3D artist working on something, and over here is like a movie playing. And they just seem to be able to do that. But more than any other group I've ever worked with, artists like dark offices, like pitch black offices. They won't even turn on their lights. They like an office like this. To the point where if you give them a windowed office, they will cover over the windows. This has happened multiple times where the blinds were not enough. They would put cardboard or foil in the windows. On 2 different occasions, at 2 different companies, at 2 different offices, there was a complaint filed by the people who owned the office building saying, hey, you can't put cardboard or foil in the windows. And we had to have them take it down. What we ended up doing was buying blackout curtains on the inside. So from the outside, they still saw blinds. And then inside of that were blackout curtains. Because the artists liked, as some other people on the team put it, they liked being mushrooms. They wanted to be in a dark, dark office. And it's usually they said it's because They wanted to be able to see their screens better, and they wanted to see color differentiation and all that. Designers are a mixed bag. It's harder to generalize with them. Some of them need absolute quiet, like programmers. Others want interaction. For many of them, it depends on what tasks they're doing. Some tasks they want interaction. Some tasks they're like, this is really complex. I need quiet. So it's kind of hard to figure out offices for them. Mixing people in the same office is usually hard. So it tends to be programmer offices, designer offices, art offices, and then where they get together is in the strike teams. With the exception, I found UI is so tightly coupled and needs that constant back and forth that for UI, I made an exception, and that was worth it. For everyone else, strike team. And let me end up this video by saying something that I've said before, which is I understand that there are people out there who do not like interaction, that interaction is actually a little painful for them. Whether they're on the spectrum or not, they're just very introverted. And I've always said this to them, I will make accommodations for you. I will make sure, maybe you don't have to be in strike teams, or if you are, you don't have to run them, you don't have to talk, but you have to be there to hear these things. And when we have our team meetings, you should be there. You don't have to talk, you can sit in the back, you don't have to interact, but I want you to be there to hear what's going on. So I basically told them, I will make accommodations for you, but you have to make accommodations for me. And if you're unwilling to do that, maybe solo dev is in your future, because it's never okay for either side to make just ultimatums. I will never do this. I will always do this. So they just have to have an accommodation. But overall, getting different roles on your project to communicate, it always has good results. It is frequently difficult to do it. So the best way I found to do it that works in general are strike teams. And specifically for some very tightly coupled tasks like UX, put them in the same room. They will learn to love it.